I'm really pleased to be here, and I am so pleased you are all here. I was thinking the other day, so who is in the room? I was looking at the guest list, who's coming. And it's really interesting. We have parents in the room, we have children, young people in this room. We have colleagues from local areas, from health, education, care and the voluntary sector. We have colleagues from national organisations. We have voluntary sector colleagues. We've got the civil service here. We've got people from government departments. We have Judge Jane here, wherever Jane is, from the Ministry of Justice. We have parliamentarians, thank you Tim, including the Children's Minister. We have the Children's Commissioner's Office. We have funders who have supported us, and colleagues from NCB and CDC past and present. And also for me, unusually, we have family and friends. My family are very, very important to me, but they very rarely see me in this guise. Like you see me nagging people about something. And so what I was thinking of is actually, do you know what? If we were to abandon this, I'm not suggesting we do, and we locked all the doors and we said, you lot are not allowed out until we solve the challenges in the SEN system, then actually this is the group of people that should be able to do it. But I want to use this time to do a bit about me and what I've learnt and leave you some thoughts for the future, which I'd be delighted to work with government on. There is something about growing up poor and determined. We are a family of strong people, and two of my cousins are in the front row. And we grew up as strong women in an environment that didn't reward poor children. I can still remember my father, who was a fairly large man, delightful soul, wasn't he? But, you know, you wouldn't mess with him. Going into secondary school and asking why I'd been put in a low set in year 7, as it is now. And she said to him, well, Mr. Lenehan, it's because your daughter looks poor. And if you looked poor, you couldn't achieve. And she told him that children like me and my cousins were cannon fodder. Raising our expectations of achievement was probably not good for us. And there is something about that poverty of aspiration that drives you and makes you more determined and stops you believing that just because people are in a box that they can't change and that life can't change. So I grew up with a sense of injustice and anger, and people say to me, well, what's kept you going all these years? And there are two things that have kept me going, and one of them's anger and one of them's passion. Trying to change a system. And when I was about 16, 17, one of my school friends is here, we went off to be good things, volunteers, and I ended up volunteering in a long-stay mental illness hospital. And I got interested in why people were there. And because they knew I was interested, they told me the stories of some of the admissions. The things I remember, being locked up for life because you stole a loaf of bread. And my favourite one, being locked up because your husband beat you and so you hit him with a pan, and therefore as a woman you were criminally insane. That's where my story started, in understanding difference and impact. And when I qualified as a social worker, I began as a residential worker, and I did it deliberately because I wanted to understand how lives were lived. I have a wonderful woman in the front here who I met when I was, about 18, Janet, 19? In residential work, where we worked in a fascinating place in the community, but we had a deputy manager who wanted us to always look very neat. And we used to take the children out and play in the woods, and then we had to tidy them all up before we brought them back. So starting out with the lived experience of children and their families and understanding that that's what made the difference. When I moved on from residential work, I worked into multi-agency teams, so in about 1983 or 4. And I moved into what was then called a community mental handicap team. And somebody had the bright idea that social workers working with health staff and others should share responsibility and accountability, and that between us we should work together. Seemed to be a good idea, didn't it? Like all good ideas, it's been round the block a few times. I also started to understand there had to be a better way of doing things. We were trying to fix bits of people's lives, but we weren't changing them properly. We were just fixing bits. So I started to understand how to work with diverse families, not always getting it right, often getting it wrong, but understanding that systems were not built on white middle-class families. You had to build them from families of all cultures and all backgrounds. It didn't always go well. I went out one day with a family. I was working through an interpreter. I was always very clear with interpreters, please interpret what I say, not what you think people want to hear. Yes, of course, they said. And I went to do a routine visit for a child at 16, trying to explain benefit changes. And I'm going through this thinking, oh, this will be fine. And the next minute it was crying and wailing, and the parents walked out of the room, and I was thinking, what have I done? What have I done? So I said to the interpreter, what did you translate? I translated what you said. I told them it would be better for your child and you if you were separated. One letter. Took me weeks to get them to trust me again. I moved on to set up services from scratch. Moved into Tower Hamlets, working for Bernardo's. Bernardo's staff are with us tonight. To look at how you set service up from scratch. How you worked in multiracial, multi-ethnic communities, how you understood context. And I understood in the end that context was everything. In 15 years in Tower Hamlets, I worked with poverty, politics, and race. And I spent my time understanding poverty, politics, and race, and taking the lessons on from the outside about how you build services that matter to communities, how you build services that deliver what people want, how you have innovation and change, and how developing a culture is actually more important than anything else. I got interested in the thing that's always interested me, which is where do you have to be in a system to make the most difference? And this was the late 80s. And I got involved in lobbying for the 1989 Children Act, which was a fundamental piece of law, which actually brought disabled children for the first time into mainstream children's legislation. They were my first encounters with the civil service. And I remember going to Wellington House, because in those days, Anne knows better than most, disabled children were the policy province of the Department of Health, rather than the Department of Education and Care. And I had to go and see a very grand bill manager, Rupert Hughes. And he was very grand soul. And I was terrified. And I got in and I had these papers and whatever. And I was arguing for amendments in terms of legislation. And he said to me, well, how can you prove you can do this? And I just said to him, if I can make it work in Tower Hamlets, I can make it work anywhere. I can make it work. I had no idea if I could or not, but I believed in what I was saying. I also had my first encounter with a select committee. And I remember turning up in Parliament, and they're quite grand buildings, and they have horseshoe tables, and you sit on the end. And I had my carefully prepared notes. And I was so nervous that I tipped a whole jug of water over my carefully prepared notes. But, you know, we got there. And as I was working with Influence, I became a member of the Council for Disabled Children under the amazing leadership of Philippa Russell. And I'm glad that Dame Philippa's with us tonight. And in those pre-HR days, my entry into NCB was very particular. Philippa rang me up one day and said, there is an advert in The Guardian next Wednesday, Christine, I expect you to apply for it. So I did. And I came into NCB as the then principal officer, I think I came in as Council of Disabled Children, because I realised it was the part of the system where I could make the greatest change happen, where I could actually be able to do that. And it was a really interesting thing for me to move away from practice into policy and to understand how you could change policy but never lose touch with the lives of families always to be able to stay credible, always to be able to stay engaged. Okay, so 23 years later, what have I learnt? Well, I've learnt that refereeing is a really good skill. I've learned that you have to understand the starting points. They're always different. It took me a long time to work out why health and education and care could not get on. And if you're in health, it's really important that the clinical needs of individuals come first. And that is a really important thing. But if you're in a local authority or a care system, what matters is changing the system for the greatest good. And the two things are not always the same. And so you're always trying to find that sort of middle ground that enables both truths to be true. And that's not easy, and it remains uneasy now. I became very good at developing shuttle diplomacy. I used to walk between the Department for Education, just round the corner, and the then Department of Health in Richmond House on Whitehall. And every now and again, the way that I managed it was I had to go and see the pelicans in St. James's Park. Because the pelicans kept me calm. Here we go again. We're going to it. It worked all right. The other thing that I learnt was that cultural change takes a very long time. My favourite part of the Children Act 1989 is the paramountcy principle. The welfare of children is paramount. That's what we said in 1989. In the Children and Families Act 2014, we built in a whole section, section 19, my team know it's my favourite, on cultural change. We wanted to understand how cultural change happened, but it's tough and it's hard, but it's worth the effort. I'm really, really pleased that Charlotte and Steve are here tonight from Rochdale, because if you want to watch an authority that's gone on a cultural change journey and made it happen, talk to them, because you're brilliant. And it's been fantastic to work alongside you. But cultural change is really important. And yet it's the thing that matters. You know, we work with processes and legislation and paperwork and forms, but actually at the heart of it, we work with people. We work with people and we work with humans and we work with building trust between one another that change is possible. And I had to believe and understand a changing world, a changing face of disability. When I first joined the council, our membership was probably traditional. We had people with sensory impairments, and we had people with Down syndrome and cerebral palsy, and traditional. But over the years, it's become everything. We work with children who have palliative care needs. It's good that the palliative care team are here, because we realised that actually what we were facing when we worked with children with palliative care needs and children with mental health needs was actually that the diagnosis didn't matter, apart from the clinicians in the room, when of course it did. But actually what mattered most was the fact that all of those children faced the same structural barriers in the system, and that our job was to support people for change and to make that happen. We also work with ideology and pragmatics, and they're both important. I think I know a number of my colleagues from the world of autism are with us tonight. 150 times have I refereed an argument about autism? At least I would have thought over the years. Philippa Stobbs is also with us tonight, did an amazing piece of work when we asked her to write a piece of work on inclusion. And part of that was to bring warring parties together in a room and come out with something sensible, which she did magnificently. But working with ideology and working with pragmatic change is challenging. And some of the things that I've had to do is understand perspectives. How can I, as a non-disabled person, stand up, represent, and advocate the needs of disabled people? And of course, the people that taught me to do that were disabled people themselves. They taught me how to be an ally. They talked to me about being able to respond to voice and to listen and to hear. The other perspective, probably the biggest that I've worked with, is parents. I've spent 42 years of my life now working with parents of disabled children. And on one hand, the challenge remains. The language of the battlefield continues. The fight, the challenge. Probably had my first conversation on the battlefield when I was about 22. Still having it now. On the other hand, things have changed, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But when you work with parents, each of them are the most amazing advocates for their individual child. We have to respect the lives that they live, the opinions that they bring, and we have to listen, respect, and learn. But we also have to understand that each story is different, that it's not a single voice, it's a narrative that we have to work with, and that sometimes we won't always agree with. One of the first parents I ever worked with was very clear to me that she wanted her 14-year-old child sterilised because that's what you had to do with people with Down syndrome. Guess what? I didn't agree. So we don't always agree, but we have to understand how to respect, and we have to understand how to work with difference, and we have to hold our own. So Tanya is here somewhere. There you are, Tanya. Tanya's here from Special Needs Jungle. And Special Needs Jungle are a really powerful voice in the sector, and it's important. And every now and again, I've got myself in terrible trouble over the years about, for example, the fact that I believe there are too many education, health and care plans. And I do. And that's not because for a single second I want to take away the rights of parents. It's because actually the system should be better than that. We should be intervening early and supporting. You might have seen the Disabled Children's Partnership report today, and Stephen and Sam are here, about the 60 billions on tribunals. We also have a tribunal judge with us today. We're spending a lot of money when things go wrong. How do we spend it when things go right, and how do we work it? One of my other perspectives has been working with the civil service itself. When I first started working with civil servants, they were a complete and utter mystery. All I knew about the civil service was there was a million unwritten rules, and I only knew I'd fallen foul of them when I got them wrong. But what I began to understand about civil servants, and many of them are here, is actually their power in making change happen in a system, but also their limitations. So how you work with people, how you support each other to make change, and how you focus your energy in the right place. I've never had to work out how to work with children and young people because they have made it absolutely clear what their voice is, and I've always wanted to listen to it. And if Carrie tells you anything different later. Okay. So the other thing we've been trying to do is to work towards system change. It's really difficult. Sometimes in our world, we have to stop people feeling overwhelmed. One of my colleagues, Anna, who's in today, was with somebody the other day, some academic, I think, Anna, who called SEN the most systemy of systems, which I think was a pretty good quote. I've always said in conversations over the years that if we were to abandon any conference that we happen to be in and design a system of support for children with special educational needs and disabilities, we'd quite frankly have to be on mind-altering drugs to come up with the system we've got now. It is an accident of history. Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. I used to run information sessions for parents, when I worked in local authorities. And at least half of the people who turned up were professionals who did not understand the system they were employed in. But when you're working like that, you have to work out how to stop people getting overwhelmed. You have to break it into bite-sized pieces. You have to take people on a journey that they know is worth happening. Janet, you spend your life saying to me, SEN is everyone's responsibility, Christine. It was that sort of stuff. It was about helping people understand. We work with professionals now who don't even know what legal frameworks they're working in anymore. So how do we break that down? How do we make it a system? And how do we show people there is progress? Because that's really important. I have real gratitude to colleagues, and many of you are here tonight, who look on and making positive steps every single day. It's very hard to be a parent in the system. It's actually quite hard to be a professional in the system as well. So to keep making that difference and keep coming back and keep wanting to make that change happen. And I have been really impressed with the resilience of the professionals I've worked with at all levels of the system. It's a really difficult challenge when you work as a professional in the system. Because actually the way to truly work in partnership with families and to truly co-produce answers is to give up some of your own power. And every now and again be weak. And every now and again be happy to say, you know, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do, but I know we'll work together on making that change happen. I'm also really conscious that if you work either in the local authority or in the NHS, you are doing it against an incredible financial, challenging background. And at a time when expectations are actually really high. And that is a tough call to make day in and day out. So, for my own way of working, I have a couple of things that matter to me. The first is working with emotion and passion. This is a system built on emotion and passion. And every day, people tell us their stories, and their stories are really important. And if you can't connect at a human level, you can't do this. You have to be listening, you have to relate, you have to understand. I want to work with humanity and humility. My success is built on the networks I make, and the people I work with, and the people that I listen to. I've also had to work with tragedy and abuse. When I started my role, I worked in long-stay mental handicap hospitals, as they were called then. My role was to look at people who were locked away from society, who were treated with little humanity and dignity. When I was fairly young, I decided to experience what life in a long-stay hospital was like, and I asked to work some ward shifts. And I think they thought I was mad, but I did. And I watched a world where no one had their own clothes. Everyone had the same bedtime. People wanted to care but had no space to care. And there was no ambition and no individuality. And that's been really important for me as I've gone through. And when, under the amazing leadership of Annie Hudson, who's here, is chair of the Safeguarding National... I always get the words wrong in the wrong order. It's got Child Practice Review and Safeguarding and Panel in a sentence. I can tell you that. And Annie's the chair. And Annie asked us to help out on the Hesley-Doncaster work. And it was really quite hard 40 years later to watch that happening again. Children a long way from home. Children whose communication skills were not recognised. Children who had stopped being seen as human beings. And when that happens, we fail. We fail as corporate parents, we fail as citizens, and we fail when we forget people have a right to be safe, secure, and loved. I was really glad the department talked about love in its care strategy. All of us have a right to be attached for someone who finds us important and someone who believes in what we can achieve. But I am really simple, as will come out from other things I've been doing, because I also believe in the power of positivity. I believe that telling us the world is going to hell in a handcart simply isn't helpful, because children and families live their lives. I believe we have to believe in positive change. It's what children and families deserve, and we have to celebrate success. And as a sector, we are lousy at celebrating success. So it's good that people get some of the children now, young people now awards. It's good that Nathan and Anna-Marie's here put on the Nathan Awards. But actually we have got to do so much more to celebrate success, because success is what keeps us going. And we really have to have a vision that tackles the poverty of aspiration. If we do not believe positive change is possible, then it won't happen. And quite frankly, our children and families deserve more than that. And I'm hoping that the change programme has an ambition for excellence, not just an ambition for change. I will let you go in a minute. I want to end up, in summary, with two things. The first is what I've seen as positive change over my time. One of them is I think that we now hear children and young people's voices and we understand their right to citizenship. I think that parental voice is at the heart of everything we do, even when it is difficult. I think SEND, maybe for all the wrong reasons, ministerial constituency mailbags and financial challenges being two of them, is actually now at the heart of the system. I believe there is a stronger vision about what we want to achieve, and with the change programme, we have a vehicle that will enable that to happen. So I'm going to leave you with 4 wishes. The first is we are serious about change after the Hesley Review. If we do not implement the changes to how that group of children were treated, children will be abused again. We have to be serious about change. I am incredibly worried at the moment, probably more worried than I have been in a long time, about the NHS. It's not just because my daughter's a doctor. I am worried about it because what I am seeing from the very hard-working teams at NHS England and from the ICB staff that I work with and the designated clinical officers that I work with is I think we are losing a priority for children in the midst of complexity. I am really worried that current changes will take children away from a focal point, and that is so important that that happens. Current changes, post-pandemic changes, are making it difficult. We are losing resource, we are losing programmes, and quite frankly, a child having to wait 3.5 years for a speech and language appointment is completely and utterly unacceptable. I want the change programme to also recognise the needs of children with social, emotional and mental health needs. We have a group of children recognised as having those needs who are seen as even less valuable than other children around them. But I know they can succeed. I know that they can, with the right input, be children who have high aspirations for success. But we have got to put the architecture in place to make that happen. And it's why I'm pleased that people like Mark are making such a positive contribution to the world of alternative provision. And finally, I want us to celebrate success in our world. I want us to embrace a real confidence that working together will result in the change that we all want to see. Thank you.